The crystal glass slipped from my hand and shattered on the walnut table. Blood seeped from my palm, but I barely felt a thing. In front of me, a tan envelope was coldly tossed down. "Divorce papers," Nathan said, as if he were simply announcing the dessert had run out. The room fell silent. More than 20 pairs of eyes turned toward me, filled with curiosity and a hint of satisfaction. Right in the middle of Thanksgiving dinner at my in-laws' house, I was being discarded, before the pumpkin pie was even served. But what they didn't know was that I'd held onto a power card for over a year, and from that very moment, everything began to shift. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's the journey of a woman who rose, turning wounds into art, pain into strength, and the very house that once symbolized contempt into a sanctuary of memory reborn. If you've ever felt cornered, belittled, or erased from your own life, stay. This story is for you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that touch the deepest parts of the heart, where vulnerability can become the greatest source of power. Now let's begin the story of Clara. The crystal glass slipped from my hand and shattered on the walnut table at the exact moment the earth-toned envelope was thrown in front of me. A thin cut stretched across my palm, oozing blood, but I barely felt it. The physical pain was nothing compared to the icy pressure crushing my chest as more than 20 eyes turned toward me, none bothering to hide their blend of curiosity and satisfaction. My name is Clara, and this Thanksgiving dinner at my in-laws' house is unlike any in previous years. "What's this?" I asked, my voice oddly calm, even though my hand trembled as I reached for the envelope. "Divorce papers, Nathan." My husband said, his tone cold and sharp like a judge's gavel. He was calm, indifferent, as if he were merely announcing the pumpkin pie had run out. I hadn't even had time to react when Evelyn, my mother-in-law, took a sip of wine and set her glass down with unmistakable arrogance. We thought doing it this way with the whole family present would be gentler. She said, each word landing like a royal decree, gentler for whom the question stuck in my throat as I caught Isla's gaze. Nathan's sister smirking behind her wine glass, like she'd been waiting for this moment for years. "You're filing for divorce during Thanksgiving dinner." I repeated each word, choking on the way out. "Darling." Evelyn continued, her cold eyes skimming over me. "Everyone here knows you never really fit into this family." Under the table, May, my best friend who had begged to come along tonight, silently took my hand. She was the only reason I hadn't walked out the moment I stepped through the door. I looked down at the plate in front of me. Turkey cranberry sauce, perfectly toasted bread, and felt nauseous. I had never felt so humiliated, and they didn't even try to hide it. "Oh, come on, Ela," chimed in her voice as sour as vinegar. Everybody knows that tiny studio behind the house is just an excuse not to get a real job. This time, laughter erupted around the table. Even a few relatives I once thought were neutral cracked a smile. I looked at Nathan, searching for something familiar, anything left of the man who once helped me paint every wall in that studio. But he avoided my eyes, as if I were a stranger in the home I once called my sanctuary. "We just want to help you wake up." Evelyn dabbed her lips with a pristine white napkin. "This family needs someone more grounded." I took a deep breath. Under the table, my hand found my purse. Inside was a document I had kept for almost a year, the deed to the house signed by Nathan on a drunken night celebrating our 6th anniversary. He didn't remember the next morning, but I did vividly. "You're all right," I said slowly, rising to my feet. Blood dripping onto the expensive tablecloth. "I don't fit into this family because I'm above these pitiful standards." Nathan looked up, his face flushed. "May, can you take me to the hospital?" I asked, turning to my still stunned friend. My hand was still bleeding. "Oh, and Evelyn," I added, "you should wash that tablecloth soon. Dried blood is hard to get out. Kind of like property transfers." Silverware clattered. "Property transfer." Evelyn asked, her voice losing its calm. I smiled a thin smile, but enough to chill the entire room. Happy Thanksgiving. This might be the last meal any of you get to have in this house. I turned away, leaving behind the shouting, the chairs scraping, and Nathan calling my name. I didn't look back. No need. All I needed was to stop the bleeding and begin the plan. May sped through the quiet streets, yellow lights spilling down both sides. I leaned over, hand wrapped in the now blood-soaked napkin, still throbbing. But that pain was nothing compared to the silent fracture within me, one that had been waiting for tonight to split open. We stopped at a small clinic. The doctor stitched up the wound, 6 stitches. I didn't flinch. In my mind, I was no longer the quiet wife of the Whitmore family. I was Clara, the only woman at that table who stood up while everyone else waited for her to collapse. Back at May's apartment downtown, I opened my phone and pulled up the draft I had written months ago for my lawyer, Harper Lynn, a sharp woman known for winning impossible land disputes. Subject line property at 92 Glenridge Avenue. It's time. I hit send. Clara, are you sure? May asked as I poured water into a glass. I looked at her, the one friend who never mocked my dreams, the one who secretly brought me buttered toast to my studio when I stayed up late. I've been silent for too long, I said, voice soft but firm. Now it's their turn to listen. The next morning, Harper arrived at the apartment as promised, with a thick file and the sharp eyes of someone who works with absolute precision. What do we do first? I asked, setting my coffee down. First, we file the ownership confirmation at the county office, she said, flipping open a notarized copy of the deed transfer from Nathan. Then we send a notice requiring the Whitmore family to vacate within 30 days. I nodded, unblinking. The time had come. That evening, I returned to the house I had lived in for 6 years, not as a daughter-in-law, but as its rightful owner. The grand estate lay in darkness, the glass door reflecting my headlights as I pulled in. I didn't knock. I rang the bell. Because I had the right, Nathan opened the door, stunned to see me. Long coat hair tied back, documents in hand. Clara, about yesterday. It's not about yesterday. I handed him the papers. It's about the past 6 years. He stepped aside. The living room still smelled of wood and expensive perfume, but now it was just a mask. The people who once saw me as an outsider were now sitting on the couch of the very home that belonged to me. "What is this?" Evelyn asked, looking at the notice I placed on the glass table. "Notice to vacate within 30 days, I replied, eyes never leaving hers. "This house has belonged to me since last year." Nathan had forgotten Isla's face turned pale, and she let out a long breath. Nathan remained completely silent. For the first time, not a single sarcastic remark echoed in the room. "I don't intend to kick anyone out," I said slowly. "But if you all think you can push me out of your lives and keep living here like nothing ever happened, then perhaps you should read that notice more carefully." I left the mansion in silence, leaving behind a suffocating house filled with people who were no longer certain of their place. That night, I couldn't sleep. I opened my laptop and revisited a plan I had sketched when I was a young girl full of dreams, pinned on the walls of the little studio behind the house. Back then, I had dreamed of turning that space into a gallery, not for works rejected by prestigious exhibitions, but for the ones dismissed, belittled by their own families. I had a vision, I had a name. The Haven. Where art comes home. I smiled softly. It was time to show them I wasn't just some backyard scribbler. The next morning, I stood before the large glass windows of the mansion. Once a symbol of the Whitmore legacy, it was now a hollow shell waiting to be reborn. The scent of old paint plaster dust and the scratches on the walls mirrored a past I was finally ready to let go of. May stepped in behind me, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. She looked around and paused in the grand foyer, the one where Evelyn once made me scrub the floor, because first impressions matter most. This place could become something entirely new, May said, her eyes lighting up. an art space full of light air and freedom. I took the coffee and nodded. "Remember, Professor Langston?" I asked. "The one who taught restoration in college. Deep voice always told stories about lost Renaissance paintings." Yes, he still had a studio in the outskirts of Cambridge. For over a year now, I had been secretly collaborating with him at night on weekends, while Nathan thought I was at yoga with friends. May laughed. Now was the time to bring that secret into the light. I said nothing more, just pulled out my phone and dialed Professor Langston. I spoke when he picked up. It's time. 3 days later, the professor's studio emerged like a different world, exposed brick walls, the scent of linseed oil and slanting sunlight through towering windows. On the table lay a portrait being restored, the woman's face awakening from a centuries-long slumber. "Right on time," he said, removing his safety goggles with a smile. "I take it the Whitmores finally learned what consequences look like." "Not exactly." I placed my design folder on the table. "I don't want revenge driven by anger. I want to rebuild everything through art." "A bold idea," he murmured, but I saw the fire in his eyes. I pointed at the original sketches. The grand hall would become the main gallery. Natural light pouring in from a skylight. Side rooms would be converted into restoration studios, classrooms and exhibition spaces for artists who'd never had the chance to be seen. "What's the name?" he asked, rinsing his hands after flipping through the design pages. "The haven where art is reborn." Professor Langston nodded slowly, then led me to a small room in the back, filled with old paintings awaiting restoration. He pointed to a torn, smoke-damaged still life. "You want to create a place for the things others say are beyond repair." "I like that," I said, "because I used to be one of those things." He didn't respond, just gently placed a hand on my shoulder. A week later, when we returned to the mansion, the architecture team had already begun peeling off old wallpaper, clearing out the heavy armchairs Evelyn used to call French heritage. I stood in the middle of the dust blueprint in hand, directing each step like a conductor guiding an orchestra. By the 10th day, I sent out the first press release for the Haven brief, but clear a mansion once representing rigid tradition would now become a sanctuary for discarded works of art. Responses came faster than I expected. An independent art magazine reached out for an interview. A collector in Chicago offered partial sponsorship of the exhibition wing, and then came the email that left me speechless. An invitation to collaborate from the Smithsonian Conservation Center, the very place that had rejected my internship application 3 years in a row, now wanting to learn from my open restoration model at the Haven. One late afternoon with golden sunlight streaming into the empty great room, I spread the new flooring plans across the tiled floor. My eyes paused on the spot where the dining table had once stood, the very place where I'd received the divorce papers. Now it would be the focal point of the opening exhibition. The memory remained, but it no longer weighed me down. May walked in holding a box of newly delivered mail. "You got a handwritten letter," she said, handing me the envelope. I opened it. Inside was a single line that left me speechless. If these walls could talk, I hoped they'd tell the story of someone who turned pain into light. Professor Langston. I smiled softly, but with certainty I was standing in the main gallery, once the Whitmore living room, when the sound of the front gate buzzer pulled me from my thoughts. Marcus. The new security guard called through the radio. "Ms. Clara, there's someone named Nathan Whitmore at the gate. Says it's urgent." I checked the time, 9 a.m., exactly the hour Nathan always preferred. Too early for a casual visit, too late for a sincere apology. Let him in, but only to the outdoor lounge. He's not allowed inside. 5 minutes later, I stepped onto the veranda. Nathan stood there, hands in the pockets of his long coat, his face, gaunt eyes bloodshot, either from lack of sleep or from realizing something he could no longer fix. "Thanks for seeing me," he said, his voice lower than I remembered. "You've got 5 minutes," I replied, arms crossed. He swallowed hard. "Isla is pregnant." I raised an eyebrow. "And what does that have to do with me?" "We were planning to move back in this spring." Nathan tried to keep his voice steady. This house has belonged to my family for 4 generations. The baby should be born here to continue the tradition. I let out a soft laugh, not mocking, but certainly without sympathy. You want the child to grow up in the house, where its mother laughed in my face. When I presented my first painting at dinner, Nathan didn't answer. You want them to play in the garden where your mother made me pull weeds all summer, just so I could learn to be a proper wife. Isn't that right? He stepped toward me, but I didn't move back. No further explanation needed, Nathan. I pulled a site plan from my coat pocket, clearly stamped and approved by the city. This house is being renovated into a community art center. It's fully funded, fully legal, and set to open next month. Everything is in order. He took the documents, flipped through a few pages, then looked up at me. My mother will never agree to this. Your mother, I said firmly, no longer has any say here. That afternoon, as I was checking the lighting system in the gallery, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. But I didn't need to look at the screen to know who was calling. Evelyn's voice rang out, still sharp as ever, without even a greeting. I demand to meet immediately. I no longer have any legal obligation to meet with you, Mrs. Whitmore. You don't understand the consequences, she said, and for the first time I detected a hint of worry beneath the commanding tone. This family has influence. You won't find peace if you destroy our traditions. Like this. I smiled without the slightest softness. I'm not destroying anything. I'm building a new tradition, one that's more human, more open and without contempt. Then I hung up the next morning. Evelyn actually showed up, but this time she didn't get in. Through the security camera feed, I saw her standing at the gate wrapped in a black cashmere coat, motioning to Marcus. Marcus, as professional as ever, stood his ground. I'm sorry, Mrs. Whitmore, Miss Clara, does not take unscheduled visits. If you need to send documents, we have a secure drop box right at the gate. She stared into the camera as if trying to burn through the lens with her glare. And I stood there calmly watching. The woman who once held absolute power in this house, now stopped by a gate to which only I had the key. That evening, I received an email from the Whitmore family's lawyer, an offer to buy back the house at twice the market price. I replied with just one sentence. I'm not interested in money. I'm interested in purpose. I leaned back in my chair, my gaze resting on the large wall where the centerpiece of the opening exhibit would hang. Soft yellow light bathed the unfinished painting shards of broken glass, forming butterfly wings, a symbol of something once shattered now taking flight. They could be angry. They could resist. They could offer as much money as they wanted. But there was one thing they could never reclaim, a voice. And for the first time in my life, I knew I had reclaimed mine. On opening night, the Haven glowed amid the crisp winter chill. Warm lights danced across exposed brick walls, reflecting off every artwork lining the main hallway, once the aristocratic foyer of the Whitmore estate. The very people who once considered this place a family legacy could never have imagined that one day it would echo with applause from artists across the city. I stood behind a temporary curtain in the gallery space, holding a glass of water, gently twisting a napkin between my fingers. Each minute, more guests arrived. Reporters, collectors, curators from major museums, even a few faces who had rejected my applications 3 years in a row. May approached wearing an emerald velvet dress, tailored just for tonight. "You have to see this," she said. "There's a line wrapped around the building. Channel 6 is setting up their cameras on the front steps." I nodded, saying nothing. My heart was pounding, not from fear, but because I knew that this time I had nothing left to lose. Outside, a tour guide began introducing the first piece. I could hear footsteps on the wood floors, the click of camera shutters and whispered comments. "Can't believe this was once a private home." At exactly 8 o'clock, a bell rang signaling the start of the opening remarks. I stepped into the light, walking to the wooden podium facing a gallery packed wall to wall. "Thank you all for being here tonight." I began, my voice steadier than I expected. This place was once filled with silence, with stifling expectations and whispered judgment. But tonight it's been given back to real stories, unfiltered and unashamed. I turned to the large painting at the center, still covered by a black cloth. This piece is the result of a year of sleepless nights, self-doubt, and moments I thought I wouldn't make it. I gave a signal. 2 staff members gently pulled down the cloth. Behind it was a large mixed-media painting, oil paint, old newspaper clippings, and shattered glass arranged into glittering beams of light. At its center, an overturned dining table, a shattered crystal glass, and mirrored fragments reflecting dozens of faces, anguish, anger, helplessness. And in the middle of it all, a woman standing tall, holding a paintbrush, her gaze steady and fixed forward. Rebirth, I said, not just of art, but of dignity, a voice of me. The room went silent, then erupted in applause. At first a ripple, then a rising wave. A critic from Boston Review approached, requesting an exclusive interview. A collector from New York leaned toward May and whispered, "I want to buy the original, name your price." Amid the crowd, the grand front doors suddenly creaked open. All eyes in the room turned at once. Evelyn Whitmore entered standing tall, her gaze sharp as ice. Behind her were Nathan and Isla, her now unmistakably pregnant belly impossible to conceal. I thought this was a public space. Evelyn spoke, her voice frosty. Of course, I stepped out from the crowd, offering a calm smile. Everyone is welcome, even those who once called art a cheap pastime. The room murmured. Cameras from the press all turned toward us. "You've used the Whitmore name to stage a personal scandal," Evelyn snapped. "You've shamed my family's legacy. I haven't smeared your tradition." I replied, my tone steady. I simply told the truth. I lived through art. I pointed toward the centerpiece. This is truth. This is my voice. And for the first time, it's being heard. Evelyn opened her mouth to retort, but another round of applause thundered through the room, drowning out all sound. From a corner of the gallery, a silver-haired man stepped forward, the chief curator of the New Albion Museum of Contemporary Art, Mrs. Whitmore. He said, "Your son should be proud. We're currently considering featuring this piece in next year's Women in Voice exhibit." The room fell silent. Evelyn gripped her clutch tightly and said nothing. Isla looked down. Nathan quietly stepped back. I didn't say another word. I turned to May and raised my glass. "What are we toasting to?" she asked, eyes warm. To the words that once shattered me, I replied now, becoming the foundation for something new. I looked back at the painting. Under the lights, the broken glass pieces shimmered like a fractured rainbow stretching across the ceiling. This wasn't revenge. This was rebirth. Monday morning, I sat in my second-floor office at the Haven, flipping through exhibition contracts from a gallery in Seattle, when my phone buzzed. It was May. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper. "Clara, turn on the TV channel 9. It's about the Whitmores." I picked up the remote, heart fluttering slightly. A bold red headline scrolled across the screen. "Whitmore Capital under financial misconduct. Investigation. Millions missing." The anchor read the news with solemn gravity. Sources revealed that Evelyn Whitmore, CEO of the company, and her son Nathan were suspected of using client funds for personal investments, including mortgaging several properties, one of which was the ancestral home on Glenridge Avenue. I sat frozen. My heartbeat pounded, not from joy, but from the realization that if I hadn't filed the ownership transfer in time, everything I'd built could have crumbled like a house made of paper. The phone rang again. This time, it was Harper Lynn, my lawyer, Clara. I just checked. "Good thing you filed early. Otherwise, that house would have been on the federal asset freeze list." I exhaled my gaze, drifting to the front garden where a few students were prepping for the afternoon restoration class. "What about Nathan?" I asked. "He's cooperating with investigators." Harper said, "Word is, he's blaming everything on his mother?" I nodded slightly. unsurprised. That evening, as I was applying the final protective coat to a 19th century frame, my phone rang again. Unknown number. But this time, I had a feeling the voice was faint, almost unrecognizable. "Clara, I have nowhere else to go." I said nothing. Isla paused, then continued voice cracking. "Nathan, cut all contact. My mother's been summoned to court. I'm about to give birth. I have no home, no money, no one." The memories came flooding back, her mocking smile at my first exhibition. Evelyn's laughter calling me mediocre and unfit to be an artist. I'm not asking for much. If there's a spare room, I'll pay later. I just need a place to sleep until the baby is born. Her voice broke. "Please, not for me." For the child, I looked down at my paint-stained hands. These were the same hands that once trembled, receiving divorce papers on Thanksgiving. Now they were building something that mattered. I took a deep breath. The guest house behind the garden is still vacant. I'll reset the door code. You can stay there until you find another path. There was silence on the other end, then a quiet sob. 3 hours later, a silver sedan pulled up to the Haven's gate. I opened it. Isla stepped out, visibly thinner, belly full, clutching a worn canvas bag. No luxury fur coat, no high heels, no designer perfume. Before me stood a completely different Isla, Whitmore, stripped bare, unguarded. "Thank you," she said, eyes red. "I know I don't deserve this." I led her down the cobblestone path past the newly planted garden. The guest house was clean with running water, fresh linens, and the lights already on. Before I left, I paused at the doorway. "I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for a child who didn't choose the circumstances they were born into. And because I believe no one should be forever defined by their worst mistakes." Isla nodded tears. Falling silently, I turned away, saying nothing more. Back in the studio, I looked up at Rebirth, hanging at the center of the gallery. The shards of glass still glittered in the light as if they had their own soul. A new message echoed in my mind. Forgiveness isn't so others can sleep peacefully. It's so I can be free. I sat down at the drafting table and began sketching for the upcoming spring exhibition. This time's theme, rebuilding from ashes. And I knew somewhere in the back garden another woman was beginning a new chapter of her own life. Early morning, the doorbell rang. Sunlight filtered through the trees, casting golden light across the aged brick walls of the Haven, now a renowned art center. I glanced at the security monitor. A woman stood at the gate, wrapped in a soft gray sweater, holding a carefully wrapped painting in her arms. Her silver hair was neatly tied back, a face I could never mistake. Evelyn Whitmore. I turned off the screen, took a deep breath, then spoke into the radio to Marcus. Let her in. But only alone. She gently placed the painting on the table and unwrapped the outer cloth, revealing an old portrait. A young woman with soft curly hair and a distant gaze. The colors had faded, and a web of fine cracks spread across the surface. "This is my mother," Evelyn said softly. This painting sat in the attic for nearly 30 years. I had forgotten it even existed. I nodded, saying nothing. She continued, her voice slower. "Now, Clara, I know I was wrong. I once belittled your dreams. I played a part in pushing you out of this family. And when everything fell apart, I realized the only things that remained were the ones that were true." I pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "I can restore this painting," I said, my eyes tracing a long crack along the wooden frame. "But it will never be exactly the same, and that's a good thing." Evelyn looked up, confusion flickering across her face. "Because it's those very cracks," I continued, "that make it valuable. The past doesn't need to be erased. It needs to be acknowledged and rebuilt with understanding and kindness." She sat in silence for a long moment, then spoke softly. "I didn't come to ask for anything. I came to learn. If you'll allow me, I'd like to work here. Office work, cleaning, taking notes, anything I want to make amends in some way. Not to undo the past, but to start living truthfully. I leaned back, considering, then opened a drawer and pulled out a file folder. Start on Monday. Someone will guide you through the digital archiving system. I pointed toward the painting, and this piece will be restored next week. I want you to be part of that. She nodded gently, and for the first time, in eyes once frozen over, I saw something deeply human, genuine gratitude. In the days that followed, Evelyn arrived on time every day. No more luxury cars, no more designer handbags, just a woman in a simple studio uniform, quietly inputting data, wiping frames, and sometimes sitting silently before students' unfinished works. Isla had also settled into the small house behind the garden. She enrolled in a short course on antique painting restoration, saying she wanted to understand the things she once dismissed. The baby was born on a quiet weekend afternoon. A healthy boy with deep blue eyes just like Nathan's, but a surprisingly gentle gaze. Isla named him Isaac, an unexpected joy. That evening, I stood beside Francisco in the main restoration studio. Golden sunset light streamed through the tall windows, casting shadows across the portrait of Evelyn's mother as we worked on the background. "You've changed this place," Francisco said, as he carefully cleaned the old varnish and changed the people inside it. I smiled softly, looking around at the young students immersed in their work. Some came from prestigious art schools, others had dropped out long ago, but all of them focused precise, treating each crack like a memory worth preserving. "None of us are perfect," I said, adjusting the magnifying lens, "but in the act of restoration, we learn how to view life not to erase, but to understand and reimagine it in a more human way." Francisco nodded, and sometimes he added the things that once broke apart, become more beautiful than before. That night, I walked out into the back garden. A gentle breeze carried the scent of blooming lavender. Isla was pushing the stroller. Evelyn sat on the porch, jotting notes into a small notebook. Isaac slept peacefully, his lips curled as if dreaming of a world untouched by pain. I looked up at the house, once a symbol of judgment and control, now reborn, not as a victory, but as healing. A piece repainted, not by erasing the past, but by rendering it more truthfully through imperfect strokes. And I understood then, from that moment on, I wasn't just an artist. I was a keeper of memory, and I was giving those memories a chance to live again in the gentlest way possible. Clara's story is proof that the cracks in our lives don't make us weaker. They become the foundation for something stronger. She turned pain into purpose. She transformed a house once filled with disdain into a vibrant center of art. In life, we've all been dismissed. We've all broken. But when we choose to rise to mend, to build meaning from the hurt life, gives us back freedom and the deepest kind of growth. What do you think of Clara's journey? Was her forgiveness, weakness, or true strength? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more moving stories about family resilience and the power of healing.